Hello students, welcome to Lucky Learning. Here in this video, I am going to discuss the most important question in your semester exams, that is called database system structure with neat diagram. When it comes to the database system structure divide into two functional components. The two functional components are called storage manager and query processor. These are the two components to the database system. And what is storage manager? Which is responsible for storing, retrieving, and updating data in the database. And what is query processor? It is one of the important component in the database system structure, which is used to simplify and facilitate access to the data by the users. Because there are different types of users can access the data from the database in a different way. Suppose I'm a query developer. I can interact with the database system using query language. Suppose you don't know anything about the database. You can also interact with the database using the user interfaces. So means the request to the database system may come in different forms. So that request is to be processed and simplified, and it should facilitate access to the data in the database system. Now coming to the database system structure, you look at where data is stored in the disk storage. And disk not only stores data, apart from that it also stores the metadata. We call metadata, means it is a called data about the data. So it also stores indices, data dictionaries, statistical data, and many things are there in the database. Okay, that is stored in the disk storage. And user is the one who is going to interact with the database system, and these users are classified into naive users, application programmers, sophisticated users, and database administrators. And these are the different people. They are going to interact with the data that is there in the disk storage, and between them what we have: database management system. This is an interface between user and disk storage. Now, first we'll understand these are the different users: naive users, application programmers, sophisticated users, database administrators. Different users can interact with the DBMS in a different way. Let us an example: naive users. Naive users means who don't know anything about the database system, but still they are going to interact with the database system. Let us an example: my father goes to ATM and he will also withdraw some amount. Automatically at the back end some transaction happen which is updating his account balance, but he don't know what is the meaning of database. That is called naive users, means who don't know anything about the database, but they can interact with the database through application program interfaces. We can simply call user interfaces. Using user interface, naive users are going to interact with the database system. Now that user interface is nothing but one executable program. We can call application program object code. That executable program in turn will have queries that is to be executed by the query evaluation engine. And that query evaluation engine is going to evaluate the query and gives the response. This is one way a naive users can interact. Now, to process that user's request in a database system, we have a two components called query processor and storage manager. So we will discuss how each user is going to interact with the data that is stored in the disk storage through this DBMS software. As just now I explained, application interface is called application program object code. That object code will have some user requests that is in the form of queries, and that queries are evaluated by the query evaluation engine. Now this query evaluation engine is going to interact with the components of the storage manager. The components of the storage manager are buffer manager, file manager, authorization and integrity manager, and transaction manager. What is transaction manager? That user's request is called one transaction. Whether the transaction has completed successfully or not will be verified by the transaction manager. And what is authorization and integrity manager? Suppose you are retrieving some data from the database you are requesting. And are you an authorized person? or whatever the data you are requesting, is it satisfying some of the integrity constraints? Those things will be verified by the authorization and integrity manager. Once authorizations are completed, then it has to look into the data dictionary. Suppose I am retrieving data from the student table. Whether actually the student table is there in the database or not, that definitions are available in the data dictionary. Suppose if the student table is there in the database, means that definition is there in the data dictionary, then only it can search for the data by consulting the indices. Indices means indexes. Suppose I want to search all the students of the CS branch. Suppose, do we have any index on branch column? If an index is there on the branch column, then it has to locate that particular records in the database so that it is going to retrieve the data from the database. Fine. And here we have a buffer manager and file manager. These are the two important components which is responsible for bringing data that is there in the disk to main memory, and from main memory again it will write back to the disk. These two components will take care about how data is to be bring from main memory to disk and disk to main memory. Fine. And next we will see application programmers. Application programmers are the programmers who writes an application program over the database. Means database is the backend, and front end we can write user interfaces. Through user interfaces naive users can interact. Now the point is, who is going to write this user interface? The person who writes that user interface is called application programmer. They use it to write application programs, means they write a source code to interact with the database. Now this source code can be compiled so that it can be converted into executable object program. That object program will consisting of some user requests in the form of queries, and that query is evaluated by the query evaluation engine, and which is going to interact with the components of storage manager so that user's query is going to be executed and gives the response. And third type of users are called sophisticated users. These are the users, they don't write any programs, but they can use some query tools to query the database. Means using some query tools like an SQL, they write SQL queries so that they can interact with the database. And these SQL queries are called DML queries. What does it mean? DML queries, data manipulation language queries. And that query can be converted into low level instructions by the DML compiler. And this DML compiler will compile the DML queries written by the sophisticated users into low level instructions, and that low level instructions are executed by the query evaluation engine by communicating with the storage manager components. And also you see, whenever a DML query is executing, as I told you, suppose I'm updating the student table, whether the student table actually present in the database or not, it has to verify first. So that to verify, it has to see whether the student table is there or not in the data dictionary, because data dictionary contains the definition of the tables. That student table is already there in the database or not, first it will check in the dictionary. If it is there, then only it will search in the database. If it is not there, there is no need of searching in the database. And also it has to check the statistics. Suppose I have a query to find number of students in each branch. In every branch, how many students are there, such statistics are if it is maintained in the statistical data, and number of records in the student table, that is called one statistic. If that statistics are there in the database, means in the disk storage, it will consult the statistics and retrieve the response, and means it will give a response immediately, right? And here there are two more lines. Whenever application programmers write application programs, they will compile that application programs, and that application program might have DML queries, and the DML queries is compiled by the DML compiler and will be given to the query evaluation engine for evaluating the query. Similarly, a naive user uses application program we call user interface. That user interface called application program object code. If that application program object code have any DML queries, that will be compiled by the DML compiler and given to the query evaluation engine for giving the output. And also you see the fourth type of users called database administrators, means who have some central control over the database system, and they are not going to use any user interface, they are not going to use any application programs, they are not going to write query tools, means they have administrative privileges. They uses some of the administrative tools to define the database schema. To define the database schema, we uses DDL queries. What is called DDL? Data definition language queries. Whenever administrator defines the database system structure, that information will be stored into the data dictionary, right? And even database administrator can impose DML queries, means they can also retrieve data from the database by using DML queries called data manipulation language queries. Again, the process same. DML queries are compiled by the DML compiler, and that in low level instructions are given to query evaluation engine. Query evaluation engine will evaluate the queries by consulting the components of the storage manager. These are the different types of users who are going to interact with the disk storage where actual data is there. Between user and disk storage, we have a software. That software is called DBMS software, having two major components called storage manager and query processor, which is responsible for interacting or making the users to interact with the database system. This is all about the database system structure. Now, for the sake of your notes, I'm giving you whatever I have explained in a separate slide. What is storage manager? Is the components of a database system that provides interface between low level data stored in the database and the application programs and queries submitted to the system. And what is storage manager? Is responsible for storing, retrieving, and updating data in the database. And what are the storage manager components? We have discussed four components: authorization and integrity manager, which is going to test for the satisfaction of integrity constraints, means some of the conditions that you have mentioned on the database schema, and checks the authority of users, whether user is authorized user or not to access the database. And second one called transaction manager, which ensures that database remains in a consistent state. We also call correct state even after the failures. And the concurrent truncation execution provides without conflict. Means when transactions are executing simultaneously, we call concurrently, that execution should not cause any conflicts. That will be ensured by the transaction manager. And third one called file manager, which manages the allocation of space on the disk storage and the data structures used to represent information stored in the disk. And the fourth one is called buffer manager. Buffer manager is responsible for fetching data from the disk storage into main memory and also decides what data to cache in the main memory. And similarly, in the opposite side, how data is to be stored into the disk from main memory to the disk, and if required, it will be stored into the cache memory. These are the four components of this storage manager. And we also have the separate data structures which is implemented by the storage manager as part of the physical system implementation. What are the data structures? Data files which stores the actual database. Data dictionary which stores metadata about the structure of the database, means what tables are there, what is its structure, what columns are there, what conditions are there, that every information about a table available in the data dictionary. Third one, indices, which can provide fast access to data items, and also we have a statistical data. And the second component is called query processor. The query processor components includes DDL interpreter, which is interprets DDL statements, means data definition language statements, and records this definition to the dictionary. And we have a DML compiler which translates DML statements in a query language into some evaluation plan, so that it will be converted into low level instructions which are executed by the query evaluation engine. And query evaluation engine is the major component which is going to execute that low level instructions generated by the DML compiler, right? These are the components of the database system structure, and hope you have understood every concept very clearly. If you like the video, do like, share and subscribe, and don't forget to click the bell icon for the regular updates. Thank you.